Today, I want to tell you a story of a 5-year-old that is right dead center, the heart of an international controversy involving Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the U.S. State Department, even Hunter Biden's law firm. But everybody seems to forget she's a little 5-year-old girl. She was actually recovered as an infant during a U.S. mission in Afghanistan. Her mother was a suicide bomber. She survived even though mom was clutching her at the chest. Military didn't know what to do with her. The Afghans that were on our side said, you got to kill her because she's just going to become another terrorist. But a good Marine and several Marines and several people in the hospitals around the world remembered she was a child. And she now lives in America with her adoptive parents, who are now fighting to keep custody of her. They claim that their daughter is a child of foreign terrorists in Afghanistan. And without the intervention of the U.S. Rangers who rescued her that night, she wouldn't be alive today. Even if they would have given them to the soldiers from Afghanistan that were on our side, she wouldn't be alive today. And if she were in Afghanistan today, she would be under the rule of the Taliban. How would that work out for a young girl? The only problem is that if this little girl is who they claim she is, then her mere existence unravels the foundations of a peace agreement between the U.S. and Afghanistan, which stipulated there were no foreign fighters in Afghanistan. But you see, this little girl proves once again the Taliban lied. These are the shaky foundations that set the stage for our disastrous withdrawal. And with the fall of Afghanistan in the background, 2 Americans fought against all odds to rescue their adopted daughter before she was crushed in the collapse of a nation. Now, perhaps without you, her future hangs in the balance. She needs help now. I want you to spend time and really listen to the American parents fighting for this little girl, Joshua and Stephanie Mast. Before we get to them, I want to tell you about our sponsor. It's Relief Factor. If pain is affecting the way you live your life, it used to affect mine like that, make this your New Year's resolution. I know, we're in February, but you can still make it your New Year's resolution. 2025 should be the year that you start feeling good again. I used to suffer from terrible pain in my hands for years, and it got so bad that I thought I was going to have to really quit my job because I couldn't hide it anymore. I couldn't write with a pencil or a pen anymore. I couldn't paint. Relief Factor is a daily supplement that helps your body fight pain by fighting inflammation, which is the source of most of our pain in our bodies and a lot of our disease. It's 100% drug-free and developed by doctors to reduce or eliminate pain. Over 1 million people have tried Relief Factor's Quick Start Kit. 70% of them have gone on to order it again. That's what the commercial said. I was like rolling my eyes. Yeah, like that's going to help. My wife made me try it. I'm now a spokesperson for them. Relief Factor, it's easy. Get their 3-week quick start for $19.95. Get out of pain. 1-800-4RELIEF. 1-800-4RELIEF or relieffactor.com. Thank you guys for coming in. I think I've done a lot of important shows that felt important when I did them. This might be the biggest possible injustice I have ever reported on. Your story is remarkable. It's very complex. Mm-hmm. And so I want to take it carefully, linearly. So we'll just tell the story. The first part needs to be, who are you? Introduce yourselves.
Well, first, thank you for having us on. We really appreciate it. It's growing up listening to you and Rush, it's just surreal to be able to sit here and talk with you.
Thank you.
So I'm an active duty Marine. I'm a major in the Marine Corps.
Active duty.
Active duty. So all this is my opinion, not
Right.
on behalf of
You
the
gotta be
government or
careful.
anybody
Yeah,
else.
got it.
In fact, a lot of it will be kind of focused on some government action that's happened to our family. I would say, describing us, we're a family of 5, grown up traveling with the Marine Corps. I've had a child born at every duty station. I'd say we're a pretty archetypical military family.
Yes. You've been in for 14 years now, so we've been married for 18 years. So our entire married life, most of our married life has been in the Marine Corps, and love the experience. And we have 5 kids, 4 of them are boys. A lot of them want to grow up to be a Marine, or that's what they say at this age. And so just red-blooded patriots through and through.
How's mom with the idea of the Marines?
I tell them to be open to, but absolutely. I mean, I'm proud of the Marine Corps and just, even our service members in general. And so I love the community. And so we've been happy to be a part of it.
You guys have been together for how long?
18 years?
Well, married 18
That's not a
years.
question.
I met him when I was 11. He was 12. So we
my gosh.
childhood sweethearts, grew up together, started dating in high school, and have been together ever since. So really, truly best friends, and been through everything together.
Okay, so now we have to introduce your daughter. 4 boys, 1 girl.
Yes.
She's the center of a lot of controversy, and to protect her, we're going to have to use John Doe's, Jane Doe, and her name is not a real name, Sparrow.
That's right.
Tell me about Sparrow. Who is she? Where did she come from? Where did the nickname come from?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll tell who she is today. So she is a 5-year-old girl that loves, just like any other girl, loves baby dolls and anything girly, pink, purple, coloring, just loves life, loves dogs, and playing outside with her brothers. And she's just a blessing and a true joy, just the most gracious little girl that you could possibly imagine. She has a remarkable past, and if you saw her today, you would never believe what she has been through.
So I don't know with what your parameters are as a Marine, but you claim that she is the child of a foreign fighter in Afghanistan, correct? Can you tell me tell me that scenario? What happened?
Sure. So I was deployed in 2019 in Afghanistan. I was attached at operational headquarters of the 4-star in overall command of both U.S. and NATO forces. And so I will never forget, I was walking to dinner one night with our staff. My colonel was a senior staff judge advocate, phenomenal leader, really appreciated my time under him. But he said, what the heck are we going to do with this baby? Walking to dinner. And what baby, sir? And he said, the operators had knocked over an Al-Qaeda facility last night, and there was there was only one survivor. It was a baby. And we didn't know it was boy or girl or much details about it, but it sounded like it was bad. And so your gut reaction and the reaction of folks from Rangers on the ground to medical staff to us was like, well, what can we do? You immediately volunteer, how do we make sure a safe outcome for this child? And it kind of developed from there, and we learned more about it over time. And now we have eyewitness testimony and declassified information from the most sophisticated unit in Afghanistan at that time in a 19-year, developed theater with I guess, a significant amount of intelligence about exactly who was there, exactly what they're doing, and where they were from.
Okay, but the actual mission that night has been classified, right?
So portions of it have been declassified, and 2 eyewitnesses have testified
that they were there and they saw.
They were there and saw it and recovered her.
So how did mom and dad die?
Well, I guess I should probably just give you an overview of the mission.
Okay.
So it was 6 September 2019, in the period of darkness between the 5th and the 6th at night. That's when they own the night. So it was a Ranger Regiment mission, which was one of our most sophisticated units in Afghanistan at that time. And so they infiltrate to an area where there's a known Al-Qaeda compound, and they're trying to capture or kill 3 Al-Qaeda leaders. And they also had another series of compounds nearby that had more fighters in them. And so they had 2 platoon-sized elements of Rangers in the cover of darkness, basically sneaking up on these compounds, surrounding them, and then issuing a demand to surrender or die. And they were briefed, and what happened exactly as they were briefed, they expected them to fight to the death. And that's exactly what happened in brutal close combat over an hour and a half, where they sustained multiple U.S. casualties, 2 guys partially paralyzed, almost a dozen, I believe, Rangers wounded, and then a dozen of the Afghan partner force were also wounded in a very kinetic engagement.
So our Rangers are there. But when does Sparrow come into the scene? She with mom, dad, both? What are mom and dad doing?
So a little bit of both. So the multi-purpose canine handler, or dog handler is how we colloquially refer to them, he described when they initially breached the structure, seeing a man holding a little baby, which we believe was her, and having an AK-47 and firing at them, engaging them. And then that weapon jammed. And so the man disappeared, the baby was no longer with him, and a grenade rolled out. So he says he had a distinct memory of looking down and seeing this grenade. And as he described it, it was like a homemade explosive. And so he says, I covered my dog and I yelled grenade because there was Rangers stacked up on the breach. And he said, even though I was the closest one, somehow I didn't get hit. And several of his buddies got fragmentation wounds. And so they were forced to, with knowing there was a child in there, throw grenades back in exchange. So there was an exchange of grenades at close range. And they had sympathetic detonations of other explosives going off from the grenades they threw into the room. And from there, they did a series of what they call barricaded shooters. So it is a suicidal terrorist who will barricade themselves in with the presence of their family in a room and engage whoever's coming in that room and not surrender no matter what. They will even blow up their families rather than surrender. And that's exactly what they experienced in room after room after room through this relatively small leadership compound. And so you asked, where was she recovered? So as they culminate and they get to one of the last rooms in this structure, they had run out of breaching explosives. And so they used what's called a Carl Gustav or a goose gun, which is a bazooka for lack of a better descriptor. And they used that to blow a hole in the final room to clear it of the remaining terrorists. And that blast killed that original, what we believe was the biological father. And the Ranger testified under oath that he observed what ended up being her biological mother run out of that hole that they created, screaming at him as he's like obliquing around a corner, covering whoever's going to come out, and exploded a suicide device about 15 feet from him. So that was his.
So on her, she blew herself up.
Correct.
And she was holding Sparrow?
So he didn't realize that at the time. So as an American, we treat, friendly, enemy, we treat wounded. And so she was incapacitated. He dragged her behind a berm, checked her medically, noticed that she had the signs of like recently giving birth. And he's kind of looking around with his night vision to and saw her moving out of the corner of his eye. And so she was about 6 weeks old. She suffered a fractured skull, a fractured left femur so bad they had to put a rod in to put it back together, and second-degree burns on her face and neck from the Carl Gustav round or the mom's vest cooking off. It's hard to say with that many kinetic events happening around her what exactly caused it. But I mean, we're talking 6 inches, and she's 6 inches higher, and she's in vital areas, and an inch deeper into her skull, and she's dead. And what was more remarkable is there's an Afghan partner force there, and they were engaged in clearing that room that they just breached, and they sustained a casualty, and were very angry about that. And so they literally came to our Rangers, and they're like, let us shoot her in the head, like the baby, like let's just throw her in the creek. And so they didn't want her to grow up to be a foreign terrorist in their country, because they're engaged in a brutal civil war at that point with a lot of foreign terrorists. And these are the cultural experts. It's their culture. Who knows better than them? And so our guys physically resisted murdering our little girl now on objective. And like, honestly, the moral courage while you have your own guys bleeding and you're in a kinetic firefight, to still have that instinct as an American soldier to protect innocent life. I mean, I'm humbled.
So, why did no one step forward? I mean, was it known that this baby was retrieved from this compound? I mean, I don't know what the situation is on how you put an ad out. Hey, are you relative to these people? I mean, you couldn't. How?
Well, that was some. So we've gotten to meet a bunch of phenomenal Americans at every level of government over the last 5 years in this. And one of them was he was what's called a civil affairs officer for the Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan. And I had some of those same questions as I'm kind of researching this, and we didn't know all this at the time, but over time we've learned. And he had asked the same question: well, how do you safely, advertise in an area controlled by Al-Qaeda or a Haqqani network in Afghanistan? How do you safely advertise that you've recovered a child? Mm-hmm. And then we had a lot of reports of foreign children, doing very poorly in the Afghan orphanage system or being treated prejudicially, just because of the brutality of the war going on there. And so he had actually asked some of the ICRC staff, that were like, oh, we found somebody who might be able to take her. And he's like, well, are they related? They're like, we don't know. And so he was very concerned that they were having to rely on the word of basically Taliban local nationals in this Taliban-controlled area for any sort of potential claimants. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge concern at our level, at the headquarters level as well. It's like, how do we safely vet people?
So you're walking with your fellow Marine, and he says, what are we going to do with this baby? When did it occur to you, maybe we should adopt?
Honestly, I think the gut instinct was we wanted to ensure the child's safety. Initially, it was just as an American, anybody downrange, I bet there's a million guys out there could close their eyes and say, hey, I can remember someone I was trying to help on deployment.
Right.
That's what this was for us originally. What happened is we were trying to, as the legal shop, guarantee a safe outcome for her. And I think DoD did a great job of doing that initially. And then we hit some interference later on with some other agencies. But what really caused us to seek adoption was getting her a visa.
But I'll never forget the phone call that I got, because after that initial talk, walking to Chow Hall, he called me, and it was in the afternoon my time, and that was not the normal time for him to call me. So initially that scared me, okay, what's going on? It wasn't very long into his deployment, and so I picked up the phone, and I'll never forget the tone of his voice. It just sounded different. And because I was searching instantly, okay, what's going on? Right. And he said, hon, there's this baby. And I was standing in the kitchen. I just stopped, and I was just listening to him describe that it was a lone survivor of an Al-Qaeda raid, and they don't know what they're going to do with this baby. And so just trying to sort through that. And I mean, as a mom, my heart goes out. We didn't know at that point, boy, girl, we just knew baby, and it was injured, and its future is, up in the air. And so I was like, well, we can do something. We'll volunteer for it. And I mean, I'm already a stay-at-home mom, have young kids right around that age range. I know how vulnerable and just, how precious children are. So it's like, we'll do something. And he's like, well, I'm glad you said that, because I already volunteered. He's like, but, they're going to do a family trace, and there's still a lot of things to figure out. So he's like, we'll see. But
so this was at a time, at first, you weren't thinking adoption. You were just thinking maybe.
Well, I mean, it wasn't, it was more of if there's, it was, like he said, guaranteeing a safe outcome. So whatever that is, long-term commitment, right. It wasn't just make sure the baby's bandaged up and okay. It was absolutely, we'll open our home to a child that has a need like that.
Yeah, and I would say that we were very aware at the time of the negotiations going on that they're going to, our presence is going to end very rapidly, and then what's going to happen? Because a lot of the funding is going to be attached to that. And so our concern, is just asking basic questions like, how bad is she hurt? What unit picked her up? Why do they say she's foreign? And then as I used kind of the skill set that I had to pull some of that information for decision makers, it was very clear exactly who she was and where they came from. And so there was all, and then as you did research on, hey, what does an orphanage in Afghanistan look like? And then add to that, what does it look like when the U.S. leaves? That was
especially for a girl.
Yes.
Especially for a foreign child.
So she was not from Afghanistan.
Yeah. So all of the U.S. intelligence and everything has been declassified, and there's a significant amount that's still left that has not been declassified, pointed to a foreign origin for her. The specific group is a Turkestani or Uyghur Al-Qaeda branch.
Okay. Yeah. So you decide to adopt, right?
Well, initially it was just seeking guardianship, and what Joshua said, it was like one step, just was the first step, and like Joshua said, it was getting a visa so that she could, because she did have ongoing medical needs. Well, I should actually back up. It was the initial conversation, and then a couple weeks later, we see the very first photo, and we call it the baby in the box. Mm-hmm. And there's this little girl in a Home Depot box on the floor of a hospital wrapped up in blankets. And so that was the first time we found out basic age, that it's an infant and that it's a girl. And then it just, when you see put a face to it, that is just where you're like, okay, what can we do? So initially it was just trying to guarantee safe, like ongoing medical care in the United States. And we were seeking guardianship, but that was, after you found out what the requirements are going to be.
Yeah, I'd say, Glenn, that we initially just advocated to elevate the priority of this child's life in the U.S. government's eyes.
So when did you decide she needs to be with us? She's ours.
Well, I think it was in the midst of pursuing all the administrative requirements to get a visa. They kept saying, oh, well, she needs a name. Well, how do you get a name for a Jane Doe baby that got blown up on an objective? And that was what the problem was. And then there was like, well, how do you arrange medical care in the U.S., which was a requirement for the visa? How do you pay for that? How do you authorize surgery on a child, a minor child? Well, you have to have some sort of legal rights. And so as this developed, we're like, okay, well, I'll volunteer to be the financial sponsor for the visa. I'll volunteer to try and get some sort of legal ability to order medical care. And so it really evolved pretty organically from that.
It was very organic. But I mean, it ultimately, I think, stemmed from our worldview in that every life is precious. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter race, ethnicity, background. I mean, she was an innocent caught in a terrible war. And so it was just a protective instinct. And we were put in the position, there was, like he said, dozens of Americans. This was not just us. This was across the board, the medical staff at Bagram. There were several people trying to protect and advocate for this one.
Was there anybody who was stepping up saying, you can't do this, you can't do this? Or was everybody pretty much on the same page?
So I think initially there was a perspective that this is like, it's an Afghan problem, it's a distraction from operations.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to use our command's influence to force the Afghans who'd multiple times said, we don't have the capacity to care for a child like this. Like I was in some of those meetings, but they were trying to force them to take them anyway. And so that's when we did a little bit of advocacy, trying to find, to elevate her
status.
Her status, her priority of this life, because we had options, and that was successful. And then the administration, the first Trump administration, reached out and directed us to act in her best interest and try to get her back to the U.S., which is pretty reasonable under the circumstances. And so we were thinking, hey, that's good to go. She's going to be safe. And as we're working that new direction, that new U.S. policy, as an office, and then I was volunteering with some of my skill sets in my free time to get a visa. That's when all this kind of developed. And then I would report that back to my husband. Hey, great news. We got guardianship. Great news. We got her added as a DoD dependent. Great news. She has a military ID. Like, we had everything lined up to get her home. And then we just had some significant opposition at some point. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the first.
From Department of State?
Yeah. But I would like to say that, and I already alluded to this, is that she was loved by so many people. It wasn't just Joshua and I doing it. It was the medical staff and, like you said, the Rangers, and there was people pulling together to the fact where we called her, to answer your question, Sparrow, after those initial phone calls, and we started to get more information about her origin. And genuinely started to care about her. I had young kids at home, and we were still early in the deployment, like getting used to him being gone, and me juggling life at home with young children. And I was finishing up my last semester at grad school and just trying to juggle life. And when we found out about her, at first I wasn't going to tell the kids because it's such a it's just like, no, we're not going to get them involved yet. But as it started to pick up momentum and actually look like it could happen, I remember mentioning it to the boys one night, and I was tucking them in bed, and I told them that there was this baby, and that was prior to us seeing the original baby in the box photo. And I said, there's a baby that's been hurt, and Daddy's trying to help see what can happen. So I said, well, let's pray for the baby. And there's a old hymn that's called "His Eyes on the Sparrow," and so that's how Sparrow came to be. Was we just prayed for baby Sparrow, and it was just kind of something that we would, when we would pray in the morning or at night, we would pray for baby Sparrow. And so there was a little bit initial hesitancy involving our family.
Sure.
And it's still to this day because they're seeing us live this out. I mean, they're in it with us.
Oh, I know.
And as a family, we're going through this together, and seeing us through the highs and lows of all of it. But at the core, it was for me at that time, it took my attention off of myself, and even kind of a little bit if I had the "oh poor me" syndrome.
Always does.
Yeah, and realizing that there's a real person out there with needs much greater than mine, and that we could potentially make a difference. And so that was, I think, all of a sudden that it had purpose and meaning. And you on that side, you were working it nonstop.
So 2020 comes. State Department gets involved. What happens?
So I guess what would be important for the viewers to understand is the Trump administration reaching out was like a lightning bolt. It was, I'm a junior officer, I'm a captain at the time. I kind of got the don't do that again, but it's a baby, so it's okay. We'll keep doing this. And so I got yelled at a little bit, it was a relief not to get fired, but we pretty much turned around and said, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense. We're gonna act in this child's best interest. We're going to try to get her to the States," and we were working that problem. But to coordinate with the Department of State, because you need that for visas, we had reached out to the embassy and set up a meeting. And I distinctly remember staying up to 3 a.m, poring over the classified intel, pulling it together for a briefing. And we went to that meeting, DOD did, to brief them on exactly what we knew. And the reason that was important was because if this is a foreign child, we wouldn't turn a British or a French or a German foreign fighters over to an Afghan orphanage. We would repatriate them at a minimum. And also, if you're going to actually do a family trace, you'd have to go to the country of origin to see if there's anybody alive and who is safe. Because here's the reality. We were targeting this group. There was hundreds of them with their families coming back from Syria into this other war zone for a safe space. And we were hunting and killing them. And so one of our biggest concern was even if you got a family member, if we give this child back to them, is she going to be on another objective and not be so lucky this time? I mean, that's understanding how sophisticated this unit and this intelligence gathering apparatus is. They're killing this entire network, and they're doing it that month. And that was the priority in Afghanistan. So we are very aware, just because of my background.
Well, our two main concerns early on was her ongoing medical needs, because she did suffer trauma. But also, like Joshua said, just that she would be put back on the X again, and she'd be targeted again.
Or she's even taken by guys who are on our side and killed because of, we don't need another foreign fighter. So the State Department tries to repatriate, or tries to put her back with people they claim were her family?
So going back to that meeting. Okay. So instead of what was supposed to happen, of an informational meeting, where we're supposed to inform them of what our classified intelligence says, they essentially ambushed us. They brought Afghans to this meeting where we can't brief on a classified level. And they basically tried to do a fait accompli, where it's hey, how soon can you take the baby? I mean, 2 days after the Trump administration reached out, that's what they were doing. I was in the meeting. And there's been a lot of, we'll get to that later in the story, but the Department of Justice under the previous administration has filed court filings saying, oh, Major Mesh knew there was known family at this particular meeting. But in reality, that was the detainee that our guys had taken off of the op. And I was there to tell you that this guy said he brought these people here from a foreign country and has been moving them around and identified these specific people in this compound as foreign fighters. So that was just some rumor because somebody didn't have the right clearance, and we were going to clear that up. And so all of this could have avoided if you're not insubordinate to the administration.
Back with more in just a minute. First, we hear a lot of talk about the supply chain. It's unpredictable. It can be very fragile at times. When your package is delayed for weeks, it's a little annoying. But when your essential medications are delayed, I had a spooky conversation the other day with somebody who's an expert on China. Oh, it was Tom Cotton. And he said, yeah, they're preparing for war. And we don't make a lot of our medicine. We get it from China. That might be bad. Listen, I want you to go to jace.com. They provide emergency medical kits that are customized to your specific need, whether you're traveling, buying for the kids, or you just need peace of mind in case of an emergency. Jace has you covered. And right now, they're holding a ton of giveaways all month long, so you can make sure you have the right medications on hand the moment you need them. If you go to their website, you could win anything from the travel case, the Jace Go, to a fully customized Jace case. But you can find out about it and you can buy one yourself, and maybe you win one too. Your health is important. Go to jace.com, enter the big giveaway, or to purchase your own case. Enter Beck at checkout for a discount. It's promo code Beck at jase.com. So who did they hand Sparrow over to?
So there was about a 2-month period after that meeting where the State Department kind of was like, we're not going to help you, but we're not going to get in your way. And we had successfully negotiated a recommendation from the then existing Afghan government to send her to the States. The DOD had done that, and it was ready to go. And so what happened is the State Department came back in, and I have a colonel sworn testimony. They lied about me and my family, like, oh, we done something improper with this, or we didn't tell people. Literally testified under oath here just in October. That this State Department official had said or lied about us. Then he said it was the most unprofessional meeting he'd ever been in. And he's the acting staff judge advocate for a 4-star command who's in charge of the theater. And he gets told, stand down, State Department's got the lead, they're going to handle this.
That's exactly what we were told as a charity at the Abbey Gate. Stand down, State Department has this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's when everybody lost their way. Yeah, great job. Anyway.
And I'm not trying to ding the entire State Department. I think that there's a lot of hope for the future and how we're moving forward with this.
I agree.
And I'm, morale's high as far as I'm concerned, at least in our unit. Mm-hmm. And but I will say that there are some people that don't reflect our values, and they don't reflect, I don't think, a proper representation of what America's about. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in foreign countries. Mm-hmm. We experienced that.
And so what we thought at the time was, if we just get the facts in front of the right people, they'll do the right thing. Like, that was it. We were very optimistic.
I've been there.
And so it's like, they just need to know the truth.
Right.
And then there's not a question. Mm-hmm. And so we advocated during that time hard for her. And unfortunately, we've now come to realize is that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And so it was literally.
It is with some.
It is with some, but what Joshua said, what the colonel testified to is, when it came down to where they determined, and it came out in Joshua's board of inquiry, is they primarily saw her. There was a few key figures that primarily saw her as, like he said, an Afghan issue, an Afghan problem, or a distraction. And fundamentally, though, there was one female that testified at his board of inquiry, a service member, and she was upset that service members came to care for this child. Like the at the hospital staff in Bagram, that they were buying baby supplies with their own money. Like, they were trying to take care of her and make her comfortable and just help a child.
What else would you do?
That's the question that we've always wondered, is why wouldn't you? But they saw it as a distraction, something to be done away with. And
I would say, Glenn, when I reached out to the hospital and said, hey, we're trying to see if there's other better options for her, they were overjoyed. Mm-hmm. Like, they were like, let's go. We've been hoping somebody would help. Right. And so we had what we called Operation Starfish, which was kind of a grassroots level to try to get a safe outcome for her.
And the story behind, so she has two pseudonyms, that it was either Sparrow, or we called her Sparrow, they called her Starfish. And there's a poem where there's a boy walking along the ocean and he's bending down, picking up and throwing the starfish back into the ocean. And so the line at the end is an adult comes along and questions, like, how can you possibly make a difference? The boy bends down and picks up another starfish and throws it into the ocean. He's like, well, it made a difference for that one. And for starfish is what they called her. She was a symbol of the one that they could help, because in a terrible war where they're seeing unspeakable like tragedy all the time, she was the unique one that they could help. And so there was this rally cry around her to protect her and to keep her safe.
Yeah, to the point where we were waking up people when the president visited Bagram for Thanksgiving in 2019. We were like waking people up, like, go find the president, have him meet her, like, because it was 100 yards,
go to the hospital to meet
100
her.
yards from where she was, and we were so close. And that was when U.S. policy was trying to get her back. So we're like, wouldn't it be cool if they go home on Air Force One?
Right.
But we were from I guess from an intelligence perspective, there was never a question of where she came from. This is totally like a gloss made up.
So how did these Afghanis get entangled in all of this?
Okay, so I think the best way I can explain this is the terms of the peace, strategically what's going on in September 2019 is the peace deal literally blew up. The president said this is a bad deal, the Taliban's not acting in good faith, and announced a canceling of the peace deal. Mm-hmm. And from there, both the Taliban is trying to get back to the negotiating table, and the embassy is rightly trying to negotiate a peace, a legitimate peace. But I think we were fed a bad deal in case nobody saw, like, 2021. But the Taliban is specifically denying the presence of this group. They formally announced it on their website, like, these reports are false. This group isn't in Afghanistan.
The Uyghur group. Possibly.
Yeah. But I guess they called them Turkestani, but this Al-Qaeda group, which is a condition of the peace deal. So the Taliban's not dumb. Like, they fought us for 20 years, right?
Right.
So they have a strategic interest in this not being a thing. And so a colonel who was the action officer in the Pentagon testified in our board of inquiry in October. He said that 6 to 8 false claimants came forward. They tested them for DNA and they were negative. So Glenn, why would 6 or 8 people who are not relatives of this child come forward? And I think the answer is they were sent forward.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And so our concern at the time was that, hey, this is, it could be someone who is being sent forward as a proxy of the Taliban. It could be someone who is just profiting off of, like, somebody trolling through a non-U.S. controlled area of Afghanistan saying, want a baby? Because at the time there was pretty severe conditions in Afghanistan. It's getting to be the fall into the winter time. And we were getting reports that, at least in Kabul, they were eating cats and dogs. They were selling their youngest children to pay for the rest of their family to make it through the winter. And so there was some significant, economic conditions at that time.
When did John and Jane Doe come into the picture?
So it really wasn't, it was John Doe's father. He was...
now, these are the people this is where the real battle begins.
Yes, and I would say at the outset of this is, I don't blame these particular Afghans. Everybody wants to come to America,
Sure.
We blame the Americans who know the truth and are covering this up. They're coming from an environment where you're living a little more hand to mouth and you have to survive. Sure. And I don't, I have a lot of great Afghan friends that we've fought with and I respect. And so this isn't about really Afghans, but it's about what the State Department did that was dangerous, like objectively dangerous. So here's how it fits in. We get told DOD gets told to stand down in December of 2019. There is a critical meeting on December 31st between the embassy and the Afghan that we've been mentoring to basically have basic child safety procedures. He worked for a Ministry of Labor. And so we've been basically training, advising, and assisting them that you do a DNA test if there's someone that comes forward and you vet people for terrorism, like not rocket science here. And they were very on board with that. And so they had a claimant come forward. And so they requested the embassy, who's the new lead, to do a DNA test of this person. But somehow, the embassy reports to the Trump administration and their own agency that the Afghan DNA test, I think the white lie was, it's not part of the Afghan process. And they've confirmed there's family members. And in reality, we spent 2 years to get this Afghan to America. He got here 3 days before our board of inquiry, as far as like, if you want to talk about the providence of God. But this guy said the only person in the world who could contradict what the embassy's saying got to America a couple days before we needed him to be here. And he said they asked for a DNA test and they denied it. So they personally, this particular Afghan or embassy employee personally denied a DNA test. And so he said there was nothing else. Like, they didn't even have photo ID. There was like some guy saying, I'm a family. And that's what the embassy forced them to go through with. And so this man ended up being his claim was a lie. Like, over the last 3 years, we've documented that.
He claimed to be a farmer, right?
Well, so the person who claimed to be a relative, who she was ultimately turned over to, claimed to be related to a person who was killed during that mission. Okay. And I believe that's a lie. I think we can document that. So he was just lying. That's why you have precautions in place to vet people.
And so Baby Sparrow is, where is Baby Sparrow at this point?
So at that time, when they were told, basically, this is the new course of action and to stand down, what we learned at Joshua's Board of Inquiry is literally one of the generals, he had the entire, like the medical staff footprint at Bagram. He sat them down and said, this is what's going to happen to her. Like, this is the course of action. This is the decision. And this is what we're going to do. And he ordered everybody. That's what the colonel testified. It was the most unprofessional dress down he's ever been a part of. He basically yelled at everybody and said, this is what we're doing. And so they turned her over with armed, what do you call armed guards?
Personal security detail.
Personal security detail. And the reason why the personal security detail, they were there, was because they were concerned about a resistance among service members. So if this was family, if this was like for her best interest and she was going to be okay, why were they worried about a resistance among young service members? Because ultimately everybody knew what her outcome was going to be, and they knew it was wrong.
Yeah, they flew a flag over Bagram in her memory because they thought she was dead. Because it was so dangerous. And there was just no vetting at all. And what I think that sometimes powerful people don't realize is, you know, there's a lot of regular people out there that can show the homework on this stuff. And I just thought that I don't think they ever thought they'd be held accountable for any of this stuff. And now, fortunately, for the last few years and some of the process we've gone through has been brutal, but we have the evidence now. And we're excited about the opportunity to, you know, I guess, show that.
So when did Sparrow, and how did Sparrow get here?
That's a miracle.
That is a miracle. The one thing I'd like to add is the night that, because we scrambled and we literally did everything we could to stop that turnover, because all we knew, it was to a person that wished to remain anonymous. And we knew that they weren't DNA vetted and that they were likely terrorist affiliated. And so we did everything we could do to stop that from happening. And I remember, I'll never forget when you came in and you got the call. It was very late at night. And he came in and he's like, she's gone. And I remember I was just like, I felt like I was kicking the gut. And I was just like so devastated, because I thought Trump or somebody would come through and save the day and she would not, you know, be turned over like that. And I was heartbroken at that moment. But I'll never forget, you said, and it was, the room was dark, and I just remember your voice, and you said, I don't know why, I have no reason to think this, but it's going to be okay. And I was like, and I was just accepted at that point because I had no words, and I was just like, okay. And so that brings us to how she got out.
2 days before the peace deal signed, the U.S. government, you know, through the embassy's representations, turns her over to an unvetted, what's turned out to be a non-relative terrorist-affiliated person. Like, the guy's got a Taliban flag on his WhatsApp profile.
Jeez.
And so everything we'd feared, I mean, as a captain, my wife and I sued the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. That's how convinced we were that this was objectively dangerous. Like, I'm thinking my career is over, but I can't sit here and not do every legal recourse. At that point, we were legal
guardians. Like, we had legal standing, and we were her.
Well, our government recognized our rights, right? She was recognized as our daughter by Headquarters Marine Corps. I'm calling on the phone, explaining what we're doing. I mean, we're talking to the White House chief of staff. We're talking to the director of USCIS. Like, as far as for a crazy situation, we're doing it as by the book as we can for a unique one-off situation. And what I think it's very important for the listeners to understand is if all of the U.S. intelligence was actually correct and the people that we sent our special operators to capture or kill were foreigners, all of this is a lie. Because if she really is who we thought she was the whole time, then all of this gloss is just smoke and mirrors. They had no reason to do what they did. And the only reason we don't know about the DNA is because these people now won't take a DNA test, and the State Department denied taking a DNA test before. And to me, if you think that there's a valid claimant, the first thing you do is a DNA test. It's the most biometrically enrolled society on earth.
So again, let me go back to John and Jane Doe.
Yeah.
Who are these people?
So John Doe is the son of this older man.
Okay.
So she was
we know that's real?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's real.
Okay.
So this older man gets her, and there's a phenomenal human rights attorney named Kim Motley, and she's got experience like dealing with like trafficked children in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
She finds her. That's a miracle in itself, but I'll gloss over it for time. This older man says, or we get some information that he's hired a young girl to take care of her. He's paying her a salary.
A teenager.
That teenager is Jane Doe. She's like 16, I think, at the time. She's finishing up high school, but it's
Living
a war
with her
zone.
parents.
We're told that it's a slum. It's in southern Afghanistan. It's so dangerous that the ICRC won't go there. And we immediately get reports that Sparrow starts shaking at night and in the day, and her eyes are twitching. And so we were very concerned about her TBI. Because like in the military community, especially, we're very aware of like the long-term ramifications of getting blown up. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, we were even trying to get her taken back to Kandahar Airfield or some of our other hospitals at the time. But then COVID happens and everything gets like shut down, and you can't even go out on the street in Afghanistan, and all that craziness that ensued. And we were Kim was trying to get her brought up to be evaluated at a hospital in Kabul that had more capability.
So 18 months passes by. The teenage girl gets married to the son.
The son of the
son.
Okay.
And so I think it's very important for people to understand. We only spoke to this guy directly 6 weeks before the fall of Afghanistan. In
2021.
In 2021. And Kim is an expert in Afghan culture, and like she's been operating there for a long time. And she's like, look, I think this is a real possibility to send her out because of her needs. But I can't get custody of a child without a way to get her out of Afghanistan. Like I can't like have another child in my care. Mm-hmm. And so we were just creating a path to the United States for her before the Taliban took over, because we were very aware that after that deadline, there's going to be a brutal civil war. Yep. And, at best case scenario, maybe there's a shared government, but that's not ended up what happened. So I talked to this guy on July 2021, first time. This is me. Here's who I am. Here's what I did in Afghanistan. We believe she's a foreign child. She was an orphan. We sought, legal responsibility for under U.S. law. My interpreter uses the strongest words in Pashto, wali, masuliat, sarprast. And my Afghan friends will probably make fun of me because I probably butchered those.
Well, what does it mean?
It means guardian, responsible one, like the strongest legal term for a non-parent being responsible, because they don't have adoption.
We would say an adopted parent.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
we would say an adopted parent in the States, but they don't have a similar legal concept there.
Okay.
And so he's using the strongest terms, and this guy, honestly, what he first wanted was a visa. Like, hey, can you give me a visa for me and my brother-in-law? Everybody wants to go to America. I don't even blame them. But no, no one could predict the evacuation. I mean, that was a historic event.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So we're sitting here saying she has everything she needs to fly out. We're legally responsible for send her before the Taliban take over. And so this guy, this is what he tells me. He's like, I'm like, how's she doing? There's a battle going on in southern Afghanistan. There's a campaign. There's artillery rounds going off near them. There's people getting shot around them. He's worried about his teenage wife, who's about 8 months pregnant, and about the artillery rounds near their house, like hurting their unborn child. Like this guy's like in a bad way, and he says he's bringing tears to his eyes how Sparrow's condition is, and and so as this is all happening, I asked, like, where is she? Like, that's a pretty good question, like in a war zone. And he's like, oh, she doesn't live with me or my family or my dad. She lives with this other family, and they've become like parents to her. Mm-hmm. And so, like, that's what's so hilarious about, not hilarious, it would be funny if it wasn't like
tragic.
So tragic.
Yeah.
Is that this guy tells me she doesn't even live with him. That's the first thing. Well, one of the first things he says to me. He tells me his father is responsible to the Taliban for her. And then, in fact, he's like, oh, I think she should go live with you. And, you know, that's so kind, that type of thing. And he's like, I have to ask my dad. He's the responsible one. And he has to ask the Taliban. So during the middle of the war, his dad travels about 100 miles from where they live in southern Afghanistan to where she was picked up. And they talked to that Taliban commander who was responsible for those camps of whether they can send her to be evacuated. Because it taken them a couple weeks. And, of course, the Taliban says no. Like, not a big surprise. And so he comes back and says, the Taliban said, no, they'll kill us if we disobey them. Sorry, basically. And so, you know, as we're developing, you know, as this situation is developing, there's thousands of IDPs getting displaced by the battles. They're all centering on Kabul. Like, we all know the history now.
Right.
It's August 16th when this guy comes back to me. The evacuation just started. And I had the privilege of helping a friend of mine, with one of his interpreters outside the wall. And he was at the Naval War College and didn't actually have access to a lot of our systems. And I was at a special unit where we could directly call the airport. And so we got this one guy out. Like, I saw it on Facebook. Hey, send me that. I routed the request, ad hoc, right? He gets out, and that hits the news. I wrote a book about it. And so he gets, my friend, who's another Marine officer, gets flooded with requests to help other Terps. And so we get sucked into, you know, all the people Mercury One funded. Like, it was totally ad hoc, totally heroic how these Americans pulled together. It was
amazing.
But like Concilium, No One Left Behind, Pineapple Express, Team America.
Yeah.
I mean,
Incredible.
it was incredible. But as that's happening, I'm like, disobey the Taliban, bring her to U.S. forces. She's viewed as a U.S. person because of her U.S. identity. We sent them her military ID to identify her, right? At the same time, the interpreter that I'm using to speak Pashto to this man, he's like, sir, my sister, she's 15. She's in the Northern Alliance areas. They've just passed an edict saying that they have to marry them off to their fighters. Can you help us get her out? And so I'm like, this is not my expertise. It's all ad hoc, right? Just like every other like service member at the time. And so I'm like, okay, man, like we'll try, but it's super dangerous. Like, are you willing to risk their lives traveling 180 miles? He's like, yes, sir. It's better than being left to marry the Taliban and take him back to Pakistan. So we move his 15-year-old sister, his, I think, 8-year-old brother at the time, and his teenage brother, all three of them. And we rent an Airbnb online in Kabul, Afghanistan during the evacuation as a safe house. I get word that they're bringing Sparrow from southern Afghanistan. We move them 280 miles through Taliban checkpoints and all that stuff in the middle of war, like right around August 22nd or 3rd. As soon as I get word they're moving, that they're disobeying the Taliban, I go to my colonel. Like, I'm standing on his desk. Like, sir, I got a crazy story for you. The State Department dumped our child 2 years ago. We've been working to get her out. We have all the paperwork. Here it is. Permission to fly emergency leave into Kabul, Afghanistan. And my colonel is crazy enough and a great enough warrior. He's like, that's what I do if I was a parent. Permission granted. And so I got a ticket, and I was on my way before I got shut down by CENTCOM. They're like, no way. We're not letting people in on emergency leave. But we ended up, it was such a unique experience because we were able to go to Ramstein and find her because they got out.
So, I mean, he's glossing over it, as you know, like that period of time, it was just, what he was doing was, I mean, as a wife, I will say heroic because it was around the clock. There was a photo I took of him because he couldn't even take a shower without his phone just going off. And he jumped out of the shower and he was sitting on the floor wrapped up in a towel. And I think at the time you were on the phone with the general. And I just thought it was hilarious that here he is on the phone with the general, can't even get a shower. But it was that high tempo.
Oh, I think it is one of the most incredible points of a 20-year war.
Yeah.
I mean, it was insane. And especially since we were working against, in some ways, our own State Department. It was really bad. But I'll save that for some other time.
So it ended up being, like he said, that we realized the plan quickly changed from him going. And I mean, he was literally, you were prepared. And I didn't know this after the fact, that you wrote a video in case you died in the process of trying, because he was fully prepared to pull them over the wall. That was his plan. I didn't realize at the time that was probably a good thing. But we end up, he's like, because we didn't know where in the world they were going to go. There was no plan. It was just like they were getting on a plane, and then it was just a guessing game as to where they're going to go. So at the last minute, I had a 9-month-old baby at the time, and I gave my baby to my sister, and we're like, we're her adopted parents. We've got to go. Like we
have all the original documents.
We have all of her documents, everything to ensure that she comes to the United States, not some other country.
Right.
So.
Well, and what was so amazing, Glenn, is this same little girl that got carried off an objective by a special mission unit in 2019, it happened again in the evacuation, because my colonel got her put on JSOC's targeting list, and a special forces squadron operating out of HKIA went behind Taliban lines and grabbed her and my 3 interpreters' kids and these 2 Pashtuns. She was 8 months pregnant. So we were very concerned of having 4 kids and a pregnant lady getting through these crowds, right? And so, like, to say that was like a lightning bolt again.
No, that was a miracle.
It was a miracle.
That was a miracle.
And so we were over the moon about it.
So the 18-year-old and the pregnant mom, if you will, the one that were and were not taking care of baby Sparrow, they're with you. They're coming to the United States because that way they can help.
So it was solely to get them away from the Taliban.
Okay.
Because if we left them behind, they would get murdered.
Okay. So they get on the plane. There's a problem on the plane, if I'm not mistaken, where John and Jane are not happy with each other, something?
So that was actually over a couple-day period at Ramstein Air Base. Okay. That was the first time that we realized that there was something going on between them, because, what John Doe told me a couple times, like, hey, she's attached to the baby, but when she has her baby, it'll be fine. Like, it'll be good. And then what she was saying when we had everything arranged, and it wasn't a guarantee go to America type situation, right? There's 80,000 people going all over the world. And so we're advocating, like, saying, hey, like, you have to send, like, these people helped us, they disobeyed the Taliban, you have to send them to America. And so we had successfully arranged that. And once that happened, it became, he promised me that if I came, I didn't want to come, but he said if I come, I wouldn't have to, like, let her go with you. And so, like, that was the first time I realized there was any disagreement at all. And, I don't know what this guy, I don't know if they have the same, culturally, the same page as spouses, right? Because typically in my training and experience, the Afghan men leave their home and they don't really care what their wife says. And so it was a unique,
dynamic.
A unique dynamic.
So, and when do you find out he's on a watch list?
Oh gosh, yeah, I'll probably get yelled at for that. So this is what happened. We get to the States about 10 hours before their official flight comes in, like that the president had commandeered with basically commercial fleet. So they're pouring into the country. They're doing the best. Like, our people are vetting them as best they can. Right? There's obviously been some failures with that. So we get to Dulles, and we have all the documents, right? All of our documents. So I go back there. It takes like 7 hours to process in, and it's crammed full of people the whole time. And at the very end, at, like, I don't know, 1 a.m, they're like, "Oh, you're all done processing. You need to take a COVID test." I'm like, "COVID test? Okay, let's go take a COVID test." And people got tuberculosis, but let's go get COVID tested.
Right.
And they take about 20 military-aged men. And they put us and me, because I'm my guy, and they drive us out into the middle of Dulles Airport, and there's this huge hangar, almost like a Bond movie, like where like a prototype plane is going to be revealed,
right.
And there's like 500 beds, and it's the only place that has not been crammed full of people this whole time. And there's like uniformed Customs and Border Patrol guys with like plate carriers and ARs, and I'm like, this doesn't look like a COVID place.
Right.
And so I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And so then this uniformed Customs and Border Patrol agent comes in, like, what were you doing in 2014? Like, what are you doing? Like, going at my guy. And I'm like I told you, I talked to this guy like 5 weeks before.
Right.
And so what concerned me is he was in this detention facility, and then he's sitting there talking to another man in Pashto. And most of our allies were like Dari speakers. Like there's some Pashtuns, but predominantly the Pashtuns are Taliban. And so he had not really talked to anybody in 4 or 5 days that I've been around this guy. And he's like chatting away. And I'm like, who's his friend? To somebody who spoke English. And they're like, oh, this guy's from his home village. Like they know each other. And then when I find out about 10 minutes later, I went up to the Border Patrol agent. I'm like, hey man, like, what are we doing here? He's like, oh, this is the inconclusives where people flagged for a match on the terror watch list and we're vetting them. And I'm like, holy cow, right? Because I have a child from a capture or kill mission of Al-Qaeda. I've got a dad who went to the Taliban shadow governor. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this guy tells my Terp before he comes to American Lines, like, hey, I have a lot of militants in my phone. Will this be a problem when I come to American Lines?
Don't tell Joshua, though.
And he's like, don't tell Joshua. And I'm like, task force is already tracking this guy. So no, it did make a difference because we know where you are. And like, and that actually was corroborated at my board of inquiry. We had someone come from JSOC and testify, yep, we knew this guy had dirt. And so I had some red flags going on. Yeah,
you sent me a video.
I have a video of it because
I'm sitting there at Dulles waiting for him because I thought same thing.
She's like,
we're
where
just
are
waiting
you?
for the COVID test. I'm like, it's wee hours of the morning. I'm like, where are you? And he sends me a video. He's like, you're never going to believe where I am. And I'm like, get out of there. You don't belong in there. And yeah, that was the first time any of this, like we realized.
And so again, kind of thinking that facts matter and like you should report stuff like this,
right? See something, say something.
So I immediately reported to my chain of command through our NCS liaison, and it kind of like nothing happened. And obviously that is when we like immediately requested like they're going to get vetted. They're probably going to get deported. We should probably like now is a good time to separate her. And my interpreter's kids also came with that. So it took them a couple of days to get their act together and actually do that. But like, I think it makes a lot more sense to the American people how this conflict started if they know the guy flags and with the context behind that. And so like that really was the turning point where we're like, hey, maybe I was projecting some compassion I had for all these allies that went to war with us. And maybe I should have been a little more cautious at the outset. Because to be honest, like we faced a decision point in the evacuation where my colonel's like, hey, you're going to probably have to choose between these Afghans and your little girl. Because the assets we're using to get them don't give a crap about Afghans, and they'll probably just stick a gun in their face and take her, and not like they're not going to waste the resources getting these random people.
Right.
And I literally had to advocate to take all of them.
You delayed it for 24 hours.
Yeah, we actually had a team that was funded by the Mercury One funds, like volunteers to go get them all. Like that were paying that they had $9,000 a head or whatever for the private aircraft, set to go. And I think they had an incident at Northgate that night, and they canceled all the volunteers going out. And that's when my colonel got then picked up by a National Administration Force unit. And so like, I guess the peace of mind knowing that there was Americans who were volunteering to go behind lines when it sounded like no one else was doing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I would touch on it in hindsight, even though it was devastating losing her for her not coming home when she was supposed to in 2019. We had a crib. We had everything ready. We were ready to go.
Yeah, we thought she'd be a handicapped child, to be honest with you.
We were anticipating taking in a baby with special needs, and we were ready as much as we could be. And then for that to be delayed for that period of time. But as a result, because of the fault and because of, honestly, how everything providentially was woven together the way it was, how many people personally...
Let me rephrase that. So I want people to understand. We were so devastated when she got turned over, and we couldn't understand why. Why would that happen? But when this historic event kicks off and you're getting texts and calls from people and you're able to get real people moved inside to safety and a new life, I mean, especially from like 8,000 miles away, it's so weird. You're so far from it, but you're changing lives, and all these volunteers were doing that too. It was very clear that was a larger purpose. We had a vision to save this one child just because we were in a place to do it. But there was a bigger plan that ended up her life, her existence, saved dozens and dozens of American interpreters that worked with us and their families. And I'll tell you one story for your audience. There was one group. They had Australian visas. Glenn, I worked with one Australian ever in Afghanistan. And I call this man as I'm dangerously driving and texting all the way up to DC to fly to Afghanistan. That's on my first attempt to go. I'm like, hey, sir, remember me? Like, I'm at MARSOC. I'm working volunteering to vet all these groups. Do you know anybody running the Australian response to the Kabul evacuation? And he goes, oh, My brother is running the Australian Army's response in Doha. Here's his number. And so I then call Australia. I called Doha while dangerously driving to DC. And they're like, we have bad comms right now. We can't reach them. We'll send an email. And I've got like 14 people in a ditch of water at 2 a.m. outside Abbey Gate. And they got like a 2-month-old and like a 60-year-old, in a range of people here, and they're Hazaras. They're Shia Muslims. They're both ethnically and religiously persecuted by the Taliban. And the matriarch of the family is an advocate for women's rights. Like, they're dead.
They're dead.
They're so dead. And so I'm like, you see any Americans around? And because we were using like a signal on a phone, right? Like everybody else was doing. And my guy wasn't at the gate at that time, and he wasn't able to get the Marine. So she hands the phone to an American. And I hear this female voice like, hello? Like super weirded out. And I'm like, hey, my name's Major Mast. I've been vetting these people. They have Australian visas. Are there any Australians? And she's like, sir, the Australians aren't doing 24-hour ops right now. They don't come on until 6 and it's 2 a.m. And I'm like, oh. I was like, she goes, what do you want me to do? It's like, I want you to pull these people in and sit them down and wait for Australians to come. So she hands me off to her captain. I do the same spiel. And this is what he says to me. He's like, sir, he goes, I'm looking at 15,000 people and I'm playing God on who gets out. So what do you want me to do? And I was like, I want you to pull these people in and sit them down and wait for Australians to come, because wouldn't it be awful if these people die when they have visas to Australia? And we were in the air to Ramstein when the Abbey Gate happened. And, in the moment, you have so many groups you're working, and we would name them very like 14 packs or passengers, 14 packs and the gate. And I was like, what gate was that? Because I talked to that girl. She was a Marine. And, I'll never forget sitting in the USO, watching them pull all the bodies off the plane at Ramstein, because they were taking them to Landstuhl, the wounded, and wondering, like, did that girl that just helped these people die doing that? And
it was her.
Yeah.
And for when I was in the car, when you were on the phone with him on the ground, and it was that moment. It was just so historic, that he's sitting there talking to someone on the ground, pulling this grave through. For whatever reason, I had the instinct. I didn't want him to see me. I pull up my phone and I record. And so I actually recorded that conversation, not knowing any of that was going to happen, but recorded that conversation that he had with that Marine on the ground, and that pulled those 14 people through as a result.
Have you met her parents yet?
No. I have not. But
would you like to meet them? I know them.
I would love to.
But we've always, I've known him ever since he was a teenager, and he never cried. I could count on one hand how many times he cried. But since this whole situation, especially Abbey Gate, he can never talk about it without crying, because you feel it so deeply. And what we saw there and the evacuation, I remember calling back home to family, and I was like, is this on the news? And they're like, no. And at the time, there was one Getty photographer and one CNN reporter. And it was historic. And like, I would echo what Joshua said, what the service members and the USO, what they were doing on the ground during the evacuation.
Remarkable.
It was heroic.
But
And on the flip side, what the State Department was doing on the ground at the same place was the greatest evil I've ever seen.
Absolutely. I talked to my I guess friends that I'd worked with in the past that were the SJs on the ground there. And like, he's telling me things like, you would not believe what we just went through. I'm a major in the Marine Corps. I'm a judge advocate, and I just cleared an airport and ran concertina wire around it, and we're probably going to get overrun again. Things are not going well. And like, just what they went, he said it's the worst thing he'd seen in 5 deployments in the GWAT.
Final segment in just a second. First, let me talk to you about Mercury Real Estate. Anytime in life you have to make big changes, it's hard. Especially true when you're planning to buy or sell a home. It's really complex. My wife and I are talking about selling our home again, and oh my gosh, I hate this so much. We're thinking about selling because the kids have moved out, and we don't need all that space. But you have to find a real estate agent, right? You got to find a good one. Well, I happen to know some good ones. You don't want the ordinary. You want the very best real estate agent. So I started a company a few years ago that helps people find the right real estate agents. Realestateagentsitrust.com helps pairs you with the top-selling real estate agent in your area, somebody who knows the best practices, somebody who understands the crazy housing market, somebody who's a team leader and a closer, somebody that you can trust. So if you're thinking about buying or selling a home or both, please get in touch with them. I think you will see what I mean, a real estate agent you can trust. It's realestateagentsitrust.com. realestateagentsitrust.com. Okay, so let's get back to Sparrow.
Okay.
You're coming over here in the United States. How long is she with you guys? Because the John Doe, he's kept out, right? Or does he get in?
No, so this is what they tell me. He's held for about 24 hours, and then a Border Patrol agent says, hey, man, this is a really bad dude, but he brought your daughter to the U.S. forces, and your organization got him in Afghanistan, so we let him through. And I'm like, whoa, no. Like, that's when I reported it up the chain. And my command was like, get your daughter and get back here. Let's, because I've been gone for like a week working. So that's what we did. We just did what we were told. And we were, I guess.
So, short version, they're here in the United States. And we've had Sparrow in our custody since September
2021. Like,
September
almost
2021.
3.5 years going on,
And we started exactly what we were going to do back in 2019. It just went through
same doctor,
went through every medical appointment that was recommended, everything that we could possibly do. And to see her when we did get her finally, she wasn't the same baby as she was in the hospital. Like, she had in the hospital with all the service members took a lot of pictures of her, and she had these big brown eyes and big smile, just happy baby, just would smile with her whole body. And when I saw her for the first time, I actually wondered if it was the same child, because her face was closed off, and she was very fearful and scared. She would hardly look up. And just the fear and trauma on her face was just, I've never seen that in a child before. And it wasn't until I saw, like, she had a dress on, I saw the scar on her, like, she has a very distinct scar on her leg. And I was like, that's her. And I could not believe it. But, when she came home, she had lice, parasites, just emotional trauma, just everything. So it was kind of like the peeling back layers of an onion, just loving on her and pouring into her as much as we possibly could.
Have you seen that little girl again?
Very much so. So now, today, she looks like her baby photos. It's like, you can see it's the same person, big eyes, just very expressive. And it's like, there she is. Like, that's the true her. But what she endured during that time, there's one story that just, our life, we are so blessed here in the States not to know the degree of violence and just that other parts of the world have. I was carrying her out to the car. We were picking up our boys from school, and there was a community that was being built next to us, and they were roofing, and they were going pop, 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 pop with a nail gun. And I had her on my hip, and when she heard the sound of the nail gun, she went, oh, and she looked at me, and the look on her eyes were fear, like, are we going to run? Is it danger? And she was looking to me to see how I was going to respond. And when I saw that, I was just like, it broke my heart. Mm-hmm. Like, that she knew that she has obviously been exposed to that. And then just, like any other parent would, just be like, it's okay, and explained it. And
who fell down? Yeah, I know.
Move on. But she's amazingly resilient and come so far.
So I'm a dad of an adopted child, and we adopted in Texas, which was a very good thing, because Texas adoption laws are so very clear. That's your child.
So is Virginia, actually.
Yeah. But it's not working out that way for you.
No, it's not.
When you sign adoption papers, I think it was 2 years, the mom could come back and say, I've changed my mind. And in Texas, that's hard, but still able at the 2-year point. I know what my wife was like and what I felt like at the 2-year point, worrying, because 2 years in, that's now my child. That's my child. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Rafe is my son at that point. Mm-hmm. How did this happen to where Virginia comes in and says, oh, forget that adoption thing.
So I think that, first of all, we have some restrictions on commenting on the state court cases. So I can't answer all the questions relating to that.
Here's what I want to know. How did you feel and how did you hear that this might be over?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is the day the FBI showed up at the door. And as a mom, literally bringing my kids in through the door from school, door keys were still in the lock. And I get a knock at the door and there were 2 agents there. And I had a baby. I went to my oldest son. I was like, take him in the room and watch him. I've got to talk to some people outside. And my son wanted to play outside. He's like, I don't want to do that. And I was like, honey, the FBI is here and I need to go do this. And he's like, they're real? Like almost like it was the Avengers or something.
Right.
And that was the first moment where, and it was actually, they were there because of the terrorists and like there was a whole, like it was them trying to sort through what Joshua had reported. But at that time, that was the first, like that was when it started to change of like, oh, there's going to be conflict. And that was heartbreaking and brought fear, obviously natural fear, because it's not about us, it's about her.
Absolutely.
And so the whole time, I mean, when she was initially turned over, what I wrestled with for the longest time is that she could go through her whole life in Afghanistan with a completely different identity and never know that she had another name and that she wasn't anonymous, that she was loved by hundreds and prayed for by hundreds of people. So for her to be at stake again, after all of this blood, sweat, tears, prayer, everything that we've invested, for that to be up for grabs again is just, the natural instinct is fear, protection, just wanting to do everything you can to keep one person safe and just wonder why people can't see the facts. Like we said, we're open books. Like, sure, you want the facts, it's all here.
So tell me, this went back to Virginia court. Mm-hmm. And they overturned the adoption, right?
So I'm nervous about getting into too much with it.
Don't say anything you're not
the legal
supposed
stuff. But I guess what would be important for folks to know is if someone you're an adoptive parent, if someone came along and said we're related to you and we're going to sue you to get him back, what's the first thing you'd ask them? DNA. That's the first thing we did, and then kind of hemmed and hawed, and the story changed about how they were biologically related to them. And that just kind of backed them into a corner of this is a lie. And so I honestly think that big picture, these people don't have authority over her. If she went back to their custody, we're talking Jane and John. Yes, they don't have legal authority. They told the FBI that. We finally got their statements where they said, oh, her 2 uncles are the authority for her life. I don't have the authority to let her go to America. But we have now, and I'm going to focus on the government's actions of this. We have the Department of Justice parroting what these mega law firms have been representing them saying, based on information they have that is directly contradictory to what the DOJ has filed in court. So to the FBI, they said, we're not in charge. But the DOJ is filing saying they are. How's that possible? How do you have statements that you haven't disclosed to the courts in the United States? You can't have...
Is it true it's Hunter Biden's law office? Or
I believe one of the firms, there's been several law firms that have represented it. I believe it was the same one that represented the president's son.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So now this is at the Virginia Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So next week we have oral argument in front of the Virginia Supreme Court, and they make a decision. But our biggest concern is that there has been a successful effort from the very same bureaucrats that tried to shut us down in 2019 about telling the truth. I mean, essentially, looking back, we were whistleblowers. Like, this is like not in accordance with everything we know. And we were right. And I think they're very concerned about that getting out. And that's why I've had my military orders change about what we can talk about. We've experienced like overclassification of information, like clearly unclassified documents marked secret, no foreign. We've had federal agencies telling us what we can and can't talk about. And honestly, absolute abuse of power to shut down the evidence. So, I was in
I was in a court case where it was against the government, and documents were at question. If you're fighting the United States government, they can classify, they can redact, they control everything.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way to win against the United States government if they have the will to make sure that that truth never comes out.
Well, and what was amazing is that early on they were said, "Well, we're impartial. We're not going to tip our fingers on the scale of justice." But what we have experienced is the exact opposite. They very much have the federal government. They have.
So, is there any difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration? Is his people back on this? Do you have?
So I would say that we're hopeful that that'll be the case, but there's so much they're correcting that was just broken in our system before.
Correct.
That for us, it's an issue of priority. I think that if an objective person looked, I guess, let me caveat that with one more thing. We went through a board of inquiry, and you said you can't fight the government. That's true, unless you have a little bit of due process. Then they have to give you stuff, and it's harder to hide things. And so they ran our family through a recycled allegations, exactly what these mega law firms, we defeated them in court, proved were false. And so we went through that process, and it was brutal. But you know what happened? They had to give you the evidence. And so now it's consolidated in one place, and there's all of the classified information that I had in deployment is now in one place. And then all of the unclassified, we had 14 gigabytes of data that we never had before. And so, although that was a brutal process, that was one way you can fight.
So what happens to Sparrow should it go wrong in Virginia?
Well, we've explained it as a Taliban Elian Gonzalez situation. That's the first thing that came to my mind when I heard the story. Yeah, these are not relatives. They probably knew they weren't from day one. They were probably sent forward by the Taliban shadow governor to collect her from the Americans. And so they can't go back without her. This guy's told me personally, yeah, we want to go back. Everyone wants to come to America for the money, but everybody loves home. I don't judge people for that. But this is really the Taliban is going to decide her future. This guy, his entire family is under their sway. If they're like, hey, I'm going to kill your family if you don't come back with the little girl, the Taliban denounced us on their social media. They've
called you out by name. Yeah.
We've had the State
Department. They called you guys out by name.
Yes.
Yeah, on their website, little talking head saying,
you should make a T-shirt.
Absolutely. Yeah. My buddies were like, how'd you do that? I've been trying to get that for years. It was kind of a joke. But what's more concerning is the State Department has filed affidavits against our family, basically insinuating the Taliban has asked them to do this. The Taliban doesn't like this and it's hard to negotiate with them. I'm really sorry that my child is inconvenient for you negotiating with the terrorist organization that you're funding, but I don't care. Get out of here. What U.S. agency files to void someone's parental rights because the Taliban asked them to? And then I get the whole we're asking you not to talk about this. Right. Sure. I'm not going to talk about this. The American people should read some of these affidavits.
Well, and I mean, on a personal note, to an extent, they did do a good job in silencing us. And the reason why we haven't gone out guns blazing before is because we're trying to protect her and our family.
No, I know.
Just parental instincts kick in.
I know.
And to answer your question, what would happen to her? It would devastate her. She's 5.5.
She has no idea who these folks are.
She has no idea who they are. We are her family.
And her brothers are her brothers.
Her brothers are her brothers, and her life and the freedom.
Taliban.
Well, and
women.
The freedom she has that now it took a while for her to loosen up, but she enjoys that now. It would be absolutely devastating to her.
And I want to add one thing. In this process, these mega firms don't care who gets hurt, right? It's winning at all costs. And they have gotten a letter writing campaign going, not just the mega firms, some other related organizations that support that type of thing. But they've wrote over 7,000 letters to Congress. And in this, they're talking about supporting their narrative, holding Major Mast accountable, and insinuating that our Rangers, who bled doing what we tasked them to do to go rid the world of these terrorists, they're calling them war criminals, and they killed an innocent farmer. And honestly, that just burns. You can say mean things.
That's the part that was classified, right? They could get away with saying that for a while, right?
These These Rangers came and testified in a public proceeding, right? It was sealed from, as far as like, it's a public record now. So it's a matter of record.
Right.
And then that was all placed into our Board of Inquiry. And so that is a public record available for FOIA and Privacy Act. So like now you can go read their 200-page testimony.
Right, but before,
correct,
that was hidden, so you couldn't defend.
Correct. And so what we want is, we think these guys own the truth. They're under non-disclosure agreements because of the unit they're serving in. So when your guys can't defend their own actions, who should do that? Well, I think it should be the SecDef. I think they should come out and release everything. If these folks want to attack our veterans and say that they committed war crimes, and we have video of them engaging in hand-to-hand combat and grenades and, shooting people at point-blank range and having guys wounded and pulled off on stretchers off the objective, paralyzed, like, release that stuff and defend these men. Like, they should be at the White House getting awards, not getting called war criminals by lesser men than themselves.
What's next?
We don't know.
No. Story's yet to be told.
We have hope that, like, there's a lot of folks, when they actually hear the truth, that have jumped on and tried to get it to decision makers. We're hoping that her life again is prioritized by the administration. They did it the first time, and honestly, the only reason she didn't come back.
This is one of the most disturbing things of our time. We're a republic. We have a constitution. We have a Bill of Rights. We have 200 years of law behind us. And it feels like we have to go to the Avengers. We have to go to Donald Trump or someone of his team to defend our basic rights. And it really bothers me. That's not the president's job, but it is, because the whole system is so corrupt.
It really is. And what it's become is bureaucrats will say whatever the law, they'll say that the law is whatever they want it to be for that particular instance to get whatever outcome they want. And it doesn't matter if it's true or just or right. And, and that's really hard for someone who, like, I really mean it when I swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. As a prosecutor, I would not even dream of prosecuting someone that I didn't believe violated the law. And then you would try to pursue an appropriate punishment for that. Like, I was a government hack, and seeing that system weaponized and abused the way we've gotten to do that firsthand, it's been incredible. But on the flip side, it's so encouraging to see progress in those departments. And I think the louder people squeal in resistance to that progress, you're probably on target. I keep up the good work.
So New York Times Magazine did a story. How did this man think he had a right to adopt the baby? This is you. Yeah. Adopt this baby. Army Rangers killed her parents. A Marine is raising her in America, but her Afghan family says she was taken under false pretenses. Wow.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fallacies with that. First of all, they're not her Afghan family, and they never were, and they probably knew that from day one. Like, that's an unfortunate reality, and I don't know what their why is, but it's just not true. So what do you want me to do with that? When this guy flags on the watch list and we're legally obligated to take care of our child and told him that from day one, what do you want me to do? What would you do if you're like, oh, this guy flagged after all of that context? You would immediately exercise care for her, which is what we did, and that was the plan the entire time. In fact, what I think was most telling was every single person who had firsthand knowledge of this backed us up. Like, the FBI interviewed all these people, and so from day one, they're like, oh yeah, they knew. They just
and I would say they have done, the media, they've done a good job at painting a narrative that's not true of the story.
They have no record of that.
But they've made it about him or us. Like, we are just off.
It's about her.
It's about her, but we're one of many people that have cared for her. Yes, we are her adoptive parents, and we have advocated for her, but we represent a lot of people that do that. So it's not just like, who do they think they are? This is many people that have stepped forward to protect her.
Yeah, and the ranger who recovered her off the battlefield, he said something that struck me. He said, they asked him, why do you remember that night? And he said, it's because it's the first time I could put a face to evil. And he was talking about her biological mother. We're talking about 20 years of war, pretty much culminating in the evacuation of Afghanistan, right? And to tell you how encouraging it is to them, it's like their why. Like, I helped that person. And like, when they found out that she's safe and home in America, they were over the moon. They're like, I always wondered what happened to that baby.
What can we do to help?
Well, we appreciate your prayers, first of all, because, she's been preserved time and time again. And so we're confident, seeing that providential hand, that will continue to be the case. You can advocate, call your congressman, call the White House, ask the president to change U.S. policy. Because really, all we need is the truth to come out, and lift your thumb off the scale there, Department of Justice.
What policy needs to change?
So the United States, air quotes, some bureaucrat in the DOJ has filed parroting these claims. And so I really think they need some adult supervision and to go pull this class.
Have you talked to Pam Bondi?
Not directly. We have had a whistleblower complaint formally routed. We routed it to the president via Congress. And we've had several congressmen sign on to that and send it to the SecDef, SecState, and the AG's office. And my understanding is the Department of Justice has reached out to state and DOD and asked them if they want to continue to stand beside the Biden administration's attack on our adoption. And so
the DOJ has done that.
Yeah, because they're basically they're the lawyer for the other federal agencies, right? So they're like, hey, you guys want to keep doing this? And so we would ask, in the name of justice and all that's good and right, to stop lying for these mega law firms and release everything. We've asked that. I asked them to declassify all of this 3 years ago. I've asked repeatedly and just gotten shut down, denied, like witnesses denied, documents denied, like nothing. Like it's they want you to in the dark and gagged as they're beating you. And all I need is the truth to come out. That's all she needs. But really, it's not, like Steffi said, it's not about us. She's not chattel. It's not between us and them. It's what is in the best interest of this real 5.5 little girl that went through so many terrible things. She deserves what's in her best interest. And what the previous administration's DOJ has done is tried to preempt even considering that question. And I can tell you as a fact, there's like 8% of the information available to the courts to make this decision. And so I really think the United States owes a duty of candor to the courts of the United States, and they need to release all of this. You can't omit key facts, critical evidence, and pretend like this is justice for this little girl.
When you find out about the case, I don't need a camera there, but I would love to meet Sparrow sometime to celebrate. And if it goes the other way, I don't know what I would do as a dad. I know what I'd want to do as a dad, but I don't know what I would actually do as a dad. But your journey doesn't stop in Virginia, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.